take a quick break from listening to the patients, give them time to regroup. I want to introduce to you a man proud to have met March 29th, 1998, because I already knew about him. I read some of his research, and proud to say that although Cheryl and I didn't see him again after that, Cheryl understood after meeting him that indeed someone in the medical community understands. So now that the Beltway traffic has allowed Dr. Denis Petro to arrive, Dr. Denis Petro.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be here today. I had the opportunity to meet Cheryl. And one of the remarkable things in medicine is to have the opportunity to meet incredible people like Cheryl is. Actually, I went to the website and some beautiful pictures, etc. I'm a clinical neurologist. Actually, a summary is available on background about my experience. I've worked with industry. Actually, a friend of mine recently reviewed the NDAs I've written and said I've written about $7 billion worth of NDAs in the United States, including the drugs Effexor and Paxil. So I do a lot of clinical research. 25 plus years ago, this is in the 70s, I actually visited a VA hospital in Pennsylvania. And the interesting thing about it, and as a neurologist, the area I went to was obviously the quad ward of patients coming back from Vietnam. And the most outstanding thing you sensed when you came in the ward was the smell of marijuana. Now, the deal is, again, I don't know if anyone's talked about the medical evidence about medical marijuana, but back then, there was very little written other than literature from, for example, the 19th century from India, etc. And also a couple of reports in the orthopedic literature about clinical effects in patients with spasticity. Anyway, I petitioned the FDA to do a clinical trial. I actually wrote a couple of articles about it back then, 25 years ago. Did a clinical trial using delta-9 THC, which was the only thing you could get from the FDA at the time, and even now in essence. And did a clinical trial which essentially demonstrated that delta-9 THC has anti-spasticity effects in patients with multiple sclerosis. Turns out it has a number of other beneficial effects, but that's the study I published, I think, in 1980. And has haunted me ever since. The reason it's haunted me is, again, you get into the issue of people who use marijuana who are patients who tend to end up in the criminal justice system. And in a number of patients in the US, and actually in Canada also, I've been deposed and actually testified at trials about the clinical use of cannabis. Now it's year 2003. There have been 7 clinical trials, 7 double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trials of cannabinoids. All of them demonstrated that cannabinoids have an anti-spasticity effect. There's no doubt about it. For those people that make the claim when they're testifying on Capitol Hill and they're going to become head of the DEA that there's no clinical evidence, there's 7 clinical trials that show that cannabinoids have anti-spasticity effects alone. And there are other beneficial effects in MS. And for the sake of time, since I've got only 5 minutes, I'll cut to the chase and just say that there is an abundance of evidence, certainly clinical evidence. I presented this material at neurology meetings in the United States, Canada, and England over the last 25 years. And there's no one that questions the therapeutic efficacy. There's no doubt about it. The problems have always been with respect to a sponsor who is actually going to go to the well and develop the drug. In the UK, there's GW Pharmaceuticals, and there are other companies that are pursuing clinical trials. In the UK, it probably will be available in an inhaled formulation within a year. In Canada, you probably know what's going on there. In the United States, I'm not as optimistic, but the deal is you can't stop the progression of science. You can't deny the science. And unfortunately, we're in a situation in the U.S. where we have the scientists saying one thing and the politicians and the regulators saying something else, so onset and side effect profile. But as far as the actual effect on spasticity, no doubt about it.
Did you try to do any studies with crude marijuana as or the entire plant, or was it just a derivative of the THC?
Yeah, actually,
did you run into any difficulties?
Sure. Back in the day, I actually visited. My initial request to do a study with marijuana was turned down at the FDA. And it was turned down for a reason that was so incomprehensible. I went down to the FDA, visited the agency, and again, the answer was so incomprehensible, I ended up working there for 2 years to try to figure out how the FDA works from the inside. And needless to say, after 2 years, I still had no comprehension of that. But the deal is, the problem with using a crude formulation is the placebo blinding issue. That is, if you inhale something and you get dysphoria, the munchies, and et cetera, et cetera, well, that's probably going to be marijuana, and you don't need to go any further, plus the characteristic aroma. So they had suggested back in the day, well, okay, if you do the delta-9 THC route, which is incidentally an awful formulation, but that's another story. If you do that and show that, that would be equivalent. But again, obviously, after I showed it, they backtracked and said, well, you didn't show it with marijuana, you showed it with this thing, which is a different drug. You know, it's catch-22.
Do you think with the research and the development of the sublingual GW product, do you think that's going to have any effect on the viability as far as the politicians in this country?
I can only tell you by history what that's going to do. That's going to say, gee, they studied it in the UK with this formulation, which is a pharmaceutical product. Actually, I need a little water. I've got the dry mouth. Read the lead editorial in the Wall Street Journal, I think 3 weeks ago on Friday, where the lady that just mentioned the fact that if each one of us went on Capitol Hill with $1,000 apiece and gave congressmen $1,000, you might get some action. And that person was talking about another medical issue. And it's sort of true, money rules. And the other thing is, in healthcare in America, healthcare is now monetized. In other words, drug companies only want to do research in things for which there is a real profit down the road.
So in other words, if GW is making money, there's a company in this country that sees money in it, and they'll probably start handing out $1,000 bills.
But the trap, you see, 20 years ago, I gave a talk up at Groton at Pfizer Central Research about this same subject. Pfizer had a drug, Merck had a drug, all of the American companies had, you know, Navalon, blah, 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 cannabidiol. They all had the proprietary rights to these compounds. And what happened was the FDA said, well, it's a Schedule II item. Well, again, no pharmaceutical company is going to give treatment for spasticity, which is a Schedule II drug. When you have an awful drug out there, namely dantrolene or baclofen, that is not scheduled. So the pharmaceutical company says, well, I'll make that slide rule calculation. Let's see, not scheduled, proprietary, and we can charge them $100 a month for the rest of their lives versus Schedule II, controversial, drug abuse potential. They all stopped developing those products in the United States. Now, some of them are available in other parts of the world. And in 86, 87, if you do a Google on me, you'll find a nice discussion between myself and the judge. It's available. Just do me, comma, I don't know, Court of Appeals 87. You'll get a nice discussion of this whole issue, which is now the same in 2003.
Questions for Dr. Denis, but they're congressmen and they don't think it works, and they say there hasn't been any evidence. Show me the evidence. So, boy, would I like to stop in one of them offices with you in a little while. Okay.